Hey, this is Ari. Welcome back to the Energy Blueprint podcast. And with me today is a Harvard trained psychiatrist, a professional chef graduating with her culinary school's most coveted award, and trained nutrition specialist. And that is a very unusual combination to see somebody with a strong background in nutrition who is also a psychiatrist. Hence why Dr. Uma Naidoo is today's guest and why I brought her onto the show. Her nexus of interests have found their niche in nutritional psychiatry. And this is really where she specializes. She wrote a book called This Is Your Brain on Food, which is a national bestseller, which I highly recommend. And she founded and directs the first hospital-based nutritional psychiatry service in the United States. She's the director of nutritional and lifestyle psychiatry at Massachusetts General Hospital and the director of nutritional psychiatry at MGH, Massachusetts General Hospital Academy, while serving on the faculty at Harvard Medical School. She was considered Harvard's food mood expert and has been featured in the Wall Street Journal. And in her book, This Is Your Brain on Food, she shows the cutting edge science explaining the ways in which food contributes to our mental health and how a sound diet can help treat and prevent a wide range of psychological and cognitive health issues, from ADHD to anxiety to depression to OCD and others. This is a deep and wide-ranging conversation with a lot of value. We talk a lot about depression. We talk a lot about anxiety, about neurotransmitters, about different kinds of foods and nutritional factors that relate to one's risk of these different conditions, things that disrupt the gut, the brain through different mechanisms. What are those mechanisms? The gut-brain axis, and so much more. I think you're going to learn a lot and love this podcast. So enjoy. So welcome to the show, Dr. Naidoo. Such a pleasure to have you.
Thanks, Ari. I'm really happy to be here.
So I would love to get started by talking about the fact that you are somewhat of an anomaly as far as conventional medicine psychiatry goes. In the sense that you have a lot of focus on nutrition. Your new book is This Is Your Brain on Food, and obviously it's focused heavily on the interplay of nutrition and mental health and brain health, which is what we're going to be talking about in this podcast. But I'm curious, how did this start for you? Why, first of all, I guess, why do you think it's so unusual for psychiatrists to talk about nutrition? And how did you become sort of an exception to that rule?
I think that the way that in the US that psychiatrists are trained, I'll start there, is that, we focus on medications and therapy as main methods of treatment, and there's several others which we also trained and study. But I would say that, for the most part, people are guided towards medications. And herein was where I felt there was a problem, because having grown up in a home where people, during the daytime when I was a kid, spent time with my grandparents because my mom was in medical school. So I learned yoga and meditation really to entertain. They wanted to entertain me and have me learn something.
Mm.
And it therefore was just very much a part of how I grew up. And for that reason, when I came into the field of psychiatry, I couldn't figure out why we were using and prescribing medications that had devastating side effects. Now, I want to be clear that I still prescribe medications. They are life-saving for many of my patients, but they also have problems. They also really impact our metabolic health. And I was noticing this and wondering why we were not asking other questions. And there were two very life-changing moments in my career, which were kind of eye-openers. One was early on in my psychiatry training. A patient was very upset with me because he felt I caused him to gain weight from a medication I prescribed, and it was Prozac. And he also had a 20-ounce cup of Dunkin' Donuts coffee in his hand, which is a favorite in Boston. And I said to him, partly to distract him, Ari, I said, "Tell me what you put in your coffee." And this 20-ounce cup, he had more than a quarter cup of processed creamer, and then he added sugar. I said, "How many packets did you put in?" And he said, 6 to 8. So when I calculated, I'm not much of a calorie counter for the long term, but I was able to show him on my computer the number of grams of sugar he was consuming and sort of the processed, unfortunate ingredients that were in the coffee. The coffee on its own was fine, but he was adding so much to it. And the empty calories that he was consuming. And I saw from being upset and angry with me, he changed into being, his eyes lit up. It almost like a light bulb went off. And I thought, wow, if he can understand that a simple tweak like that makes such a big difference and can help him maybe lose weight over time or eat healthier, I saw the power of it. And that really made me change how I was speaking to all of my patients. We grew to have a great therapeutic relationship. He didn't need a high dose of Prozac. He, over time, lost weight and really was inadvertently my first test patient because I saw the power of interpreting good nutritional advice to someone. And then the other sort of aha moment was with me was an unexpected one where I myself ended up the patient, and wasn't by choice, but I was diagnosed with cancer, and when I was facing my first chemotherapy treatment, I found myself, questioning how, why, feeling super anxious, a lot of angst, and partly because I knew exactly the side effects I was about to face that day. And I was making myself a cup of tea that, my grandmother taught me this recipe for golden chai when I was a kid, and trying to calm myself down. And I realized as I was making that, why was I not leaning into what I knew and what I had been teaching and educating and sort of helping people clinically at work to do using nutritional psychiatry principles. And it's funny, when you're the patient, you sort of lose sight of a lot of stuff because it's such a different situation. And I made a conscious choice to really lean into everything I knew. So I became my own test case, but not by choice. And I realized how powerful. And every week that I would go for my chemotherapy treatment, my doctors would say, "What are you eating? We want to know what you packed for lunch. What are you drinking? Because you're coming in and you're doing well. And you don't have side effects." And it was a very powerful message, especially for me. And these two moments really spearheaded what I feel has become a mission around my book, This Is Your Brain on Food, to help people use nutrition for improvement of their mental well-being. And of course, it's a holistic model, so it's more than that, but one of the pillars is nutrition.
Mm-hmm. Excellent. So I have a big question for you. It's okay if this requires a very long, in-depth answer or sort
Like
of
the one I just gave.
many layers of an answer. Well, this one's more sciencey, less personal. So I'd like to sort of create an overview for listeners of how nutrition actually interacts with brain health. What are some of the key, maybe 3, 4, 5 different physiological mechanisms or pathways that nutrition is actually affecting what's going on in our brain and how that ties into mental health?
That's a great question, Ari. So, as research evolves, we understand that there are different mechanisms by which the brain is impacted by food, and some of them include things like oxidative stress, um, as well as I think what is the most important, in my opinion, but amongst others, the gut-brain connection. And this is newer science because it really has evolved in the last 1 to 2 decades, even though Hippocrates, nodded to this in statements that he made eons ago. And Hippocrates really is considered the father of modern allopathic medicine. It took science a long time to catch up. And now that we understand there is this connection between the gut and brain, we were able to understand further that the gut and brain originate from the exact same cells in the human body, the neural crest cells. These cells then divide up and form two different organs in the body, the gut and the brain, but then they remain connected anatomically by the 10th cranial nerve, the vagus nerve, which I like to call a two-way text messaging system. And these organs are communicating all the time. But one of the things that we also need to put together is in the gut, we know that serotonin and other neurotransmitters are working. We know that they are involved with the brain, but 95% of serotonin is made in the gut. And also there's several receptors, about 90% of the receptors are there. So you realize then that the gut has this location for serotonin, then there's this communication mechanism. And you realize that as we're eating food and it's getting digested and it's going to the gut, the food is going to interact with neurotransmitters. It's also going to interact with the trillions of microbes that are in the gut microbiome. And those microbes are really there to support our health. We should be taking care of them. And there are trillions of them. But, when our food is broken down, the good microbes, on the days that we are eating a healthy meal, the good microbes are able to help with that process. And the breakdown products are things like short chain fatty acids, which are great for the gut, help to lower inflammation. Another anti-inflammatory foods, another great way to explain this mechanism. And on days that, if we are consuming more of a sugar-laden or say a fast food diet, the what we need to also understand is the breakdown products of those foods can be very toxic to the gut environment. And there are bad microbes that live alongside the good microbes. And when they are fed with sugar and fast foods and stuff like that, their breakdown products are toxic to the single cell lining of the gut. When they damage that lining over time, conditions like leaky gut arise, and the condition in the gut of inflammation is called dysbiosis. So we start to therefore unfold that the food mood connection evolves based on this connection between the gut and brain. And there are several other mechanisms, anti-inflammatory foods, the mechanism of oxidative stress, how we combat that, understanding neuroplasticity, and more. So there are many more different ways, but the one that I feel really captures it for people is when you understand how your food is digested and the fact that the actual digestive products impact that environment and impact your gut. It's a very simple way to think about making that connection come alive for you. And
Mhm.
that's the reason I focus on it. And I wrote my book based on that.
Beautiful. Yeah, I definitely want to dig more into the gut brain axis. Um, I've heard this figure many times before about 90%, 95% of the serotonin that's produced in our body is produced in our gut rather than our brain. And oftentimes this is communicated in a way that it implies that therefore all of that serotonin is sort of modulating our happiness, right? We have this narrative that's been inculcated into the population for many decades now that serotonin is what controls our happiness or depression. Serotonin deficiency equals depression. And if we're depressed, what that means is we have a chemical imbalance that we need to correct with these SSRIs, these specific serotonin reuptake inhibitors. That's sort of the popular narrative that's been around a long time. More recently, I guess to add one more layer to this, there was a paper that recent systematic review that just came out by Moncrieff et al. And showed that the data really does not support the serotonin deficiency imbalance model of depression.
Mm-hmm.
What are your thoughts on, I know there's a lot in there and we can sort of go into this piece by piece, but maybe starting with this piece of what is actually the role of serotonin, whether produced in the gut or the brain? What's the nature of this relationship of serotonin to happiness and depression, in your opinion?
In my opinion, I think that there are a lot of things that we need to be super careful about because science, and especially nutritional science, is ever evolving. I'm aware of the study, and I think that I think it's great that someone brought this information forward. I want to just be clear, though, that anyone listening to this shouldn't, just stop taking their medications without speaking to their doctor because that can be hugely dangerous and have side effects. But that being said, I think, in my opinion, the way that we diagnose individuals based on the DSM-5 is flawed. These are checklists, and humans do not fall into checklists, especially the emotional well-being. Someone might have PTSD and a touch of depression. Someone might have anxiety and ADHD. People just simply don't fall into one category. Now, that has been a respected way that all of us have been trained, and I still use it when it's necessary, and I use it as a framework. So we have an issue with diagnostic categories. then we have an issue, which is something we touched on already, that the system is dedicated towards, yes, therapy is a very important part of treatment, but it's medication driven. Some of that is actually related to how insurance reimbursement happens. So a psychiatrist in hospitals, for the most part in the United States, psychiatrists are expected in a clinical setting to prescribe a medication as part of their visit. They're often not called on their therapy training to do that. And part of that is related to how reimbursement happens. So if you choose not to prescribe a medication, you may not actually at times be able to follow that patient long term because they sort of get a visit with a psychiatrist. That in itself is flawed because we are trained to do more than just prescribe a medication, but that is the system in itself. Nutrition doesn't even enter the conversation for the most part. The other piece about it is that serotonin, dopamine, GABA, all of these different chemicals are involved. So we know that it's not just one theory, it's not just one hypothesis, it's not just one substance. We also know that there are many factors that impact mood, anxiety, where serotonin has been implicated. I think that this is super helpful information for us to have. In fact, this year there were two things that were pretty huge in mental health that were unearthed. One was the Moncrief paper, I believe it was from the British Medical Journal, and the other was that some of the findings in the initial core research around Alzheimer's disorder and how the images were done were found to be fraudulent. So billions of dollars of research were done on what we think was fraudulent data.
Wow.
And has led us in a direction around the hypothesis of how we're treating, how we're trying to figure out, how we're trying to find a cure. So those are two very big things.
I
And
actually don't know the part about Alzheimer's. Was it that the images were focused on these beta amyloid plaques and or something to that effect?
correct. So they were focused on proving this hypothesis, and the paper was, I believe, more than 15 years ago. And I forget the details, Ari, of how it came to light, but it's written about all over in the popular press, and it's been published in a journal that an expert re-examined these images, and these images were tainted and found to be tweaked in a way that seemed to imply a certain outcome.
Wow.
Then that outcome was what everyone based their research grants on because it was now a proven hypothesis, let's call it. And so I feel that just taking those two things and the work that I do into account, I realize in a very humble way, we really don't know the answers. So when you ask me about serotonin, what I can say is it's involved. I have seen people improve their symptoms, like the patient I mentioned, on a small dose of Prozac and feel better. How much of that was the therapeutic relationship, his changes to his lifestyle and nutrition, the actual medication? It's really not clear.
Yeah.
So I'm not trying to avoid answering the question. I'm saying that it's multifactorial,
Right.
and that this is where an integration of research and clinical skills and being able to actually talk to a patient is hugely important. A lot of really brilliant people put out tons of data on nutritional psychiatry or nutrition or mental health, and never see a patient. And I think there's an issue with that. So in integrating it, I will tell you that people have done well with nutritional and lifestyle measures, because I practice a method that is really a holistic, integrated, and functional. So it's not just one thing, but nutrition is a pillar. I can also say that the integration of actually speaking to someone and tracking symptoms is hugely important. And when you realize that someone can be depressed due to a life event, a huge loss. So, it may not be the loss of a loved one. It could actually be the loss of a job. It could be the loss of an identity. It could be so many different things. You also realize that, someone with a head injury can suffer from depression or anxiety or other symptoms in mental health. There's a whole subspecialty of psychiatry that deals with that. when you put this together, I think the best we can do is assess someone clinically, you know, do the best we can to offer them a really thorough evaluation of what's going on, and then test to see what could work for them. And I don't always use medication. In someone who is able to function, I might use lifestyle measures first. But I'm a trained psychiatrist, and I therefore feel comfortable at least being able to assess someone's safety. So that is one of the most important things in mental health is if someone is safe, they're not suicidal, they are not so severely depressed, you can use other methods alongside that. But sometimes in the emergency room or the clinic or the acute care clinic, you see someone who's actively very either manic, psychotic, has lost touch with reality, or depressed. So very long answer, but I'm hoping you know I'm open to conversation about it, but I'm hoping you see what I'm trying to say about the breadth of the number of things going on.
Yes, absolutely. I guess a couple more questions related to neurotransmitters. And this might be hard to answer, but to what extent do you think mental health issues can be explained by neurotransmitter imbalances in the brain versus other mechanisms?
I think it's one of many different things, and I don't think that all of it is actually fully known. Um, so I think they play a role. Do I think they're the only thing? No. Um, I think that they do impact mood, they do impact symptoms, and we need to include them in the conversation. But we may not need to rely on them as much as we did. Now, that being said, that's where speaking to uh, a trained psychiatrist or a clinician who can evaluate your symptoms and decide if you need a medication becomes important. Medications are not always needed. But here's the other thing, um, there are there are probably mechanisms that we don't know yet that we are still researching. One of the exciting areas of research is really finding solutions through food, so psychobiotics, and or through nutrients. And so, can these actually be taken by individuals to feel emotionally better and to offset symptoms, but be in the form of a food or nutrient? And by manipulation of the gut microbiome, the gut microbes. So I think that as those types of solutions are added to, say, the buffet of solutions that we have, I think that becomes important too, so that we don't just have what I feel like mental health relies on, which is pulling out a prescription pad and giving you a medication when you leave your doctor's office, because it doesn't always work. And I think we also know from research that, for example, in anxiety, it's been shown that, only a certain percent of people actually get better. For the large part, most individuals may not have a full treatment of their symptoms, may still be suffering, and some are not touched by the medication at all.
Mhm.
So,
Gotcha. So, as far as the gut brain axis is concerned, and I know you've mentioned some of these in passing, but what would you say are the sort of two or three key pathways to understand about that relationship between what's going on in the gut and the brain, to understand how the gut health affects brain health?
sure. So I think understanding firstly that connection and how food is broken down, and a healthy food versus a less healthy food, and what that impact is. The second is the actual gut environment. Now, those gut microbes perform many functions for us. They are helping with hormone production, vitamins, sleep and circadian rhythm, which is our internal body clock. They're helping with our immunity. 70% of the immune system is in the gut. So super important at a time like now and beyond. So they're doing lots of things, plus impacting mental health. As they are acting, one of the ways that they act is they interact with food. We need to understand that they are producing byproducts, they are interacting that gut environment, they are impacting inflammation or fighting off inflammation. So they are functioning as well. And then the third component to realize is in this environment, there's a very uh, delicate single cell layer that is the lining of the gut. And that lining is easily damaged. So when you are producing more toxic substances, that lining gets damaged, and these cells have something called tight junctions. When those are pretty easily damaged, there's leakage, and you get conditions like leaky gut or intestinal permeability. And with these toxic substances then enter the circulatory system. So you start to realize the gut and brain are connected. Then if there's leakage, this is all going to reach and go back to other parts of the body, but it's also going to go back to the brain. And this is where neuroinflammation gets set up. And neuroinflammation, one of the other mechanisms by which which we are considering in this whole emerging field, becomes important. There's some really top researchers in cognitive health and Alzheimer's, like my colleague Dr. Rudy Tanzi at Mass General. And one of the things he really firmly believes is that neuroinflammation can be reduced in its early stages by how you eat, like your lifestyle measures, a plant-rich diet, anti-inflammatory foods, fiber-rich foods. One of the ways that you can actually lower that inflammation in your brain simply by how you eat.
Mm-hmm. Excellent. What about productions of vitamins and neurotransmitters in the gut? And, we mentioned serotonin already, but I know GABA is another neurotransmitter that's produced in the gut. I know that last I looked into this maybe a year or two ago, it seemed that there was some controversy around the role of GABA in the gut. And some theories were suggesting maybe it travels through the vagus up into the brain. Other theories were saying that maybe it just signals, the vagus detects the presence of GABA in the gut and then signals something to the brain. So it modulates brain expression just via nerve signals. What would you say overall about the importance of vitamin and neurotransmitter production in the gut related to mental health?
I think it's hugely important, and I think that there's always updates to research and how we're thinking, and in my more than 20 years experience of sort of doing this work, one of the things that I feel is that say we know that there are different ways that GABA interacts. We know that GABA is important. We know that serotonin is important. We now know that the gut microbiome is important, and we know that these gut microbes are effective. I want to use the example of omega-3 fatty acids here. Just take a second to do this. As someone practicing mental health, we often will lean on omega-3 fatty acids as a supplement, or in my case, I prefer to suggest food sources for individuals. And for the most part, this is one supplement that many psychiatrists actually do lean on. They will, often include that in a treatment plan, and we know that there's a lot of good data on improvement of mood, help with cognition, help with anxiety, and others. There was a very big study published in December of last year by colleagues of mine who looked at a geriatric population of individuals and found that omega-3s did not help geriatric depression. So again, this was a well done study, well researched, and should it mean that I would never give that supplement or suggest that food to an elderly patient? No, because more and more we're also moving towards highly personalized medicine, and the gut microbiome in each person is like a thumbprint. So more and more we have theories, we have scientific theories, we have ongoing research. Thank goodness we're learning all the time, but we also have the individual, and I think that's where it becomes important to integrate that there's ongoing research like you shared about GABA. But it's hugely important to understand the gut plays a role in vitamin production and hormone production and neurotransmitters, and it may be different for each person. Now, take vitamin D, for example. We get 80% of our vitamin D by spending 10 minutes of time outdoors in actual daylight, not through a window, because of how vitamin D is produced. So I think that understanding these little nuances knowing that, vitamin B9, folate, you get a ton of it from leafy greens. Low folate is associated with low mood. Um, so as you put together the facts that we've known or we learn from research with what is going on in the person's body in a personalized way, and you understand that the gut is hugely important and integral to these different mechanisms, it becomes important. I also think the other thing is food. Food impacts all of this, and that's where I think food is a powerful tool to help all of us.
Excellent. So, getting into sort of more practical stuff around specific mental health conditions and specific foods, what would you say are some of the biggest specific foods or nutritional factors that relate to one's risk of depression?
So the foods that you want to be careful about are very important because many people consume foods and they worry about their waistline or their weight gain, and they don't realize that these foods are actually impacting their mental health. So the typical Western diet, called the standard American diet or SAD diet for a reason, um, is rich in sort of sugar, high fructose corn syrup, processed, ultra processed foods, lots of stabilizers, food coloring, etc. And they do cause weight gain, but they also have very devastating effect on our brain. And so a lot of foods that we consider so-called comfort foods are discomfort for the brain. A lot of foods that are treats, called treats by individuals, actually mistreat the brain. And a lot of the things like artificial sweeteners that disrupt, many of the artificial sweeteners are disruptive to the gut microbiome. Um, the unhealthy fats, the hydrogenated fats and the processed vegetable oils are just not great for us because they're disruptive to the gut. They are pro-inflammatory. They upset the omega-3 to omega-6 ratio in the body. And gut inflammation ultimately leads to brain inflammation, and they become problematic because inflammation is seen as one of the underlying mechanisms for things like cognition, cognitive disorders, depression, anxiety, and more. Um, so when we break it down in that way, we realize that there are foods that we want to cut back on and be careful about. But the foods that you can lean into, one of the biggest foods is fiber. It's one of the nutrients that most Americans don't consume. We tend to be worried about the grams of protein we're consuming, but we don't consume nearly enough fiber. So a big database study showed that I think 1 or 2 out of every 10 Americans eats enough fiber. Yet fiber, which we get from plants, fruit, beans, nuts, seeds, legumes, and whole grains, actually nurture those gut microbes and feed them. So they need fiber in order to function. So any fiber-rich food is something that you can lean on. Um, Prebiotics, probiotics, and fermented foods, another huge group that actually can help offset mood symptoms. The study that looked at the use of a probiotic supplement versus Prozac showed that the supplement did better. So even eating a probiotic-rich diet can help you. Fermented foods, a huge study from a research group out of Stanford, a highly respected group, looked at fermented foods and was published in Cell in summer of 2021. And this showed that actually eating fermented foods and adding this to your diet can reduce the amount of inflammation. So hugely helpful, those sort of that group of foods. Omega-3 fatty acids, like we mentioned, which you can get from fatty fish, wild caught salmon, and other types of fatty fish, but you also can get plant-based sources from things like flax seeds, sea algae, and more. The plant-based sources do have the short chain omega-3s less efficiently, transmitted to the brain, let's say, but still worth including in your diet. So those are just some of the foods to think about. And then one of the ones I always like to mention, which I think are the hidden gems in our kitchen cabinet, are spices. Saffron and turmeric have been shown to be extremely helpful in terms of mood. So depression, definitely something to consider. And for turmeric, always add a pinch of black pepper.
Yeah. Saffron has some amazing research on it. I am
Yes.
I've been pretty blown away by some of the research on that related to mental health. However, it seems like almost all the studies on it come out of Iran, and Iran
Mhm.
is also one of the world's biggest exporters of
Produces saffron.
saffron.
Mhm.
And so
Mhm.
you wonder about the sort of conflicts of
You
interest
always
that might be present there. I would love to see some, studies on saffron that are done in other countries, but certainly from the research that's there, it seems like pretty amazing.
certainly a good bunch of them do come from Iran. The saffron supplements that, and the reason I mention this is it's one of the times when a supplement may be helpful to someone. And we do all have nutritional gaps. None of us eats a perfect diet. But I say this because, when you consume food, you just don't use enough saffron.
Mhm.
And so supplement becomes important. And I've definitely had people um, feel better when they use a saffron supplement because high doses of saffron are used. But as with all research, it's always important for those of you reviewing the research and looking at the different studies to check that the authors don't have conflicts.
Yeah.
And that may not be a conflict that was that they needed to actually disclose in a paper because maybe they're not manufacturing the saffron. But it's a good point that much
Mhm.
of a very large production of saffron or growth of saffron happens there.
Mhm. What are your thoughts on artificial sweeteners? Do you feel they're
So for
safe? Are they safe in
yeah,
general? Are they a risk for mental health or brain health in particular?
so they unfortunately don't do well in mental health for the most part. The older sweeteners, there's some newer ones that are showing some, I would say, some better signs in the research, but we don't have all the mental health data on them yet. So for the most part, if you had drinking a diet soda and you have anxiety, that could be very problematic for you. Um, uh, Artificial sweeteners can offset symptoms, and I've seen that happen. One clinical example is someone who was trying to actually give up soda, moved to diet soda, and became more anxious. So even though the sugar-laden soda, the 20 grams of sugar in I think it was a 12 to 16 ounce bottle or maybe 20-ounce bottle, um, of soda wasn't great for the brain either. The artificial sweetener unfortunately set up the anxiety. So some of the newer sweeteners, one of them is cellulose, stevia and erythritol have a better relationship with insulin. So if my patients come in and they just have to have something sweet, and anything in moderation, a little bit of stevia, a little bit of erythritol, a little bit of maybe allulose. There are even newer ones coming out on the market that I've heard about through my work with the World Economic Forum. So, what I can say is be careful with sweeteners, use them in moderation. Really try to move away from things like diet sodas. Read to see what sweeteners in them. Um, One caveat is stevia can set off anxiety in people, and studies have shown this. So if you do suffer from anxiety, be a little bit careful with stevia because although it's natural, for some reason it doesn't always do well in people with anxiety.
Interesting. Interesting. Um, what about anxiety? Is it sort of the same as far as, and you just mentioned one thing with sweeteners there, but is it
Yeah.
sort of the same as the list with depression as far as the foods and the nutritional factors that affect that, or are there some key differences?
There are some key differences because there are slight nuances with every one of the mental health conditions. Um, with anxiety, one of the foods that you can lean into is tryptophan, which is a precursor of serotonin, but tryptophan actually has been shown to help anxiety. And in some countries like Canada, it's a supplement that needs to be prescribed. But you can get tryptophan from things like chickpeas. You can get it from certainly certain types of poultry. And then there are vitamins that have been shown to be helpful and minerals. And the reason I mention the minerals is magnesium is often overlooked, but magnesium can be significantly helpful for anxiety, as well as potassium and selenium. You get enough selenium from one or two Brazil nuts a day that you can eat. So that's always a good one to lean into. And then there are some herbs that people often brush aside as unimportant, but lavender, passion flower, and chamomile can actually help people with anxiety. And then vitamins they can lean into are vitamin D, we mentioned sunlight, 10 minutes of outdoor time, vitamins B1, B6, A, C, and E. So the foods, and what I did in my book are is in the final chapter, share recipes, but for these different foods and these different vitamins, I list the vitamin and the type of food so people have a checklist that they can go to because it's hard to remember everything.
Mm-hmm. I'm curious, in the book, which I highly recommend, I enjoyed thoroughly,
Thank
you
you.
emphasize a lot on gut health, feeding the microbiome, and on the importance of fiber and plant foods with regards to that. I'm curious if you have any thoughts on the carnivore diet trend that's happening in recent years.
Sure. So, I try my best to remain diet agnostic because although I happen to have been raised vegetarian just because of religious reasons in my family, um, I cook anything as a chef, and I have no formal objections to anyone who eats whatever they eat. But my position in nutritional psychiatry is it is related to your mental well-being. So a balance of whatever you're eating with the moderation around the unhealthy foods becomes important. I think diets that choose and leave out entire food groups are problematic. And I think finding some kind of um, moderate balance of how you eat becomes important. So how I evaluate someone who comes in is based on what they're eating and tweaking that diet. I don't necessarily say to people, you have to become a carnivore or you have to give up this food group. The nuances in mental health is that mental health is so closely, intricately related to metabolic health now, and medications that are prescribed for certain mental health conditions actually impact your metabolic health. So things like insulin resistance, gaining weight become hugely important, and we can't ignore them. For that reason, if someone is eating fruit, I'll suggest that they eat lower glycemic fruit, like berries. If they are struggling with their weight, either they've had depression and they just have not been active, or maybe they have side effects of a medication, like my patient I mentioned. It wasn't a side effect. You know, I will be cautious about working with them around TCR, therapeutic carbohydrate reduction, being careful about which carbohydrates you consume. But what I don't want them to do is give up an entire food group if they don't need to. Some people cannot eat gluten because they have celiac disease. Some people are, like myself, vegetarian because of their spiritual background. Others feel very strongly about being plant-based. That's really their prerogative. But whoever it is, if I'm there to help their mental health symptoms, I want to tweak it. I i i, I feel the carnivore diet is a little extreme, and I think the same goes for any extreme diet. So I would want an individual who came in with that diet really appreciate some balance that I want to provide through
Mhm.
my consultation.
Are there any whole foods groups of whole foods that you consider problematic? Obviously there are all sorts of dietary belief systems, dietary cults who have
Yeah,
spent many years demonizing pretty much every conceivable food there
yeah,
is,
yeah.
demonizing either, red meat and encouraging people to go vegan, or and
Yeah,
demonizing milk, or demonizing eggs, or
right, right.
demonizing, now we have people demonizing fruit, people demonizing lectin containing foods like
Hmm.
lentils, and people
Right.
demonizing cruciferous vegetables because they have potentially goitrogenic compounds in them. People now demonizing just greens and vegetables, claiming that they have plant toxins in them that are trying to get you and are bad for you. I think the only thing left is water that's safe to consume.
Right.
So I'm curious if, from your vantage point, oh, and I forgot grains. I should definitely mention grains and gluten.
Yes,
Certainly
grains.
lots of
Yes.
demonization of that.
Hmm.
Um,
Hmm.
from your vantage point, are any of these claims valid, or are there any specific groups of whole foods? Understanding processed foods are
Right,
obviously very problematic, but in
right.
terms of whole foods, are there any groups that you are concerned about?
So, in different mental health conditions, certain foods that may be problematic for others can be problematic. Gluten, for example, in anxiety, I've seen individuals um, have increased anxiety, and what I would do is be very careful to do short elimination and see if their symptoms are improved. Sometimes that works, sometimes it doesn't. So it may not be the substance it's related to. And these are individuals who don't have celiac disease. So I use that by way of example to say, Ari, that it's often the quality of food, the source of the food, and how much you consume of the food. I'm of the belief that most people, um, well, let me frame it this way. Many Americans eat the standard American diet. How can we move from that type of eating to a healthier form of eating? It doesn't start with demonizing food groups, because then people go to the supermarket and they are literally afraid
Mhm.
of what they can buy. Can I buy an egg? Can I my children drink milk? Should I eat the vegetable? Should I never eat red meat? Whatever it might be. There's
And
been
it creates stress and nocebo effects as well.
it, that this is so true, and I see it all the time. It becomes People can become orthorexic, which is sort of becoming so careful because they want to eat a healthy diet that they're only drinking water. So when it comes to, for example, in 2020, there was a very important study by Astrup and colleagues on really revisiting saturated fats. And it really helped me moving from that paper to how I think about it. Um, I think about it differently. I think that some red meat of the right quality is okay for you. You don't have to give it up completely. You don't have to eat it once a week. You can eat it in moderation, but it's less of an issue than we initially thought.
Hmm.
Um, that being said, I think that let's look at the foods you mentioned. If you're eating dairy, one of the things with dairy is much of the world is lactose intolerant and don't realize it. But if you are consuming dairy, try to get, and access is an issue, these foods are sometimes more expensive. Grass-fed dairy is a better option for you. Um, Kefir is a fermented food, but if you can get a good quality one or find a way to make it if you're interested, that may be an option for you. If you're eating eggs, omega-3 rich eggs that are pastured may be a better option for you. Again, I say that, but not everyone may afford the high prices on these, right? Um, Wild salmon is a better option. So try canned, because it's sometimes much more expensive to get wild salmon in a supermarket. Um, you know, uh, Lentils and grains and beans are hugely important for fiber if you can tolerate them. There are ways to reduce the lectins, the phytates in them, simple cooking methods, and I suggest those to people. I don't ask them to exclude the entire food group unless they've had a problem. So with all of these different, let's say, uh, ideas that come about, it's not that there isn't some research behind some of what people are saying. I think the messaging is the problem.
Hmm.
Because I think when you use fear mongering methods or fear based tactics, then I see the impact in my clinic all the time. People are, like I said, just scared to buy any kind of food and they're wondering what's left to eat.
Yeah.
So balance and moderation, the source of your foods, the quality, the portion size, all of that becomes important. If you can, use regenerative farming, for example, that's a good option. If you can eat meats that are wild, so if uh, some meats are naturally wild because they're not farmed. You can try that. They're just ways to think about it and still consume foods that you may want to eat, and that doesn't have to be demonized.
Hmm. Are there any hidden trigger foods that people think are good for them but are actually harming them?
So I think that I'm going to use a condition here to explain this, and the reason I'm going to share a little bit on this is because generally, we think of some of these foods as, no problem with them. Things like tomatoes, um, for example, are generally rich in lycopene, are super healthy, and, actually helpful. But in conditions like PTSD, and I've seen this in OCD as well, foods that have glutamates that are even natural glutamates, in tomato sauce, in miso, which I would otherwise recommend, which is fermented soybean paste, just two examples, as well as tomatoes themselves, can be problematic for people, and I've seen that happen. So you may not think that this is an unhealthy food, but you have a certain cluster of symptoms, and I've seen an uptick in symptoms in this way. I might go back and say, look, are these foods that you're consuming, without realizing it?
Mm-hmm. Gotcha. How does caffeine and coffee consumption, as well as alcohol consumption, fit into your picture, your paradigm of nutrition and mental health?
So, alcohol can be a problem in terms of if someone has a substance abuse problem. So, as a psychiatrist, I have to make sure and evaluate that they're not overly consuming alcohol, which can be problematic in that way. But if they, having a glass of wine here and there, and they are drinking alcohol, I always suggest a few things, in moderation. Um, and when I say moderation, I usually ask people what they're drinking, because that gives me guidance, because moderation to one person can mean something else to someone else. Just like a patient told me that pizza and Coke was technically a vegetarian diet. I think the specifics become important. So in moderation and clean cocktails. So if you're drinking a cocktail, simple syrup is simply sugar. There are ways to get around that, staying away from the added fruit juices and added liqueurs. Cleaning up your cocktail will not just reduce the calories, it'll reduce the sugar load on your body, and that becomes important. So drinking in moderation, clean cocktails, and context. So, example, um, the Blue Zone study talks about Sardinians drinking red wine 1 to 2 glasses with dinner, and this being a very big part of how they live. But they also eat with a sense of community, a sense of family, happily enjoying their food, sometimes outdoors, sometimes indoors. All of that also matters. So, alcohol, clean up your cocktails, drink in moderation if you consume alcohol, and some positive effects. I mean, red wine resveratrol has had some good data behind it. So, it's not entirely evil, but there are also people who say never ever drink alcohol because it's a neurotoxin. And my position is more people than not in the United States drink alcohol. So I'm going to go with the fact that I'm trying to move people from the standard American diet to overall what we're eating to a healthier diet than that. And if they're consuming alcohol, I want them to have those tips with them. With coffee, caffeine is different from coffee, right? The problems that people are experiencing are with the caffeine content, but coffee on its own, as a substance, has a lot of plant polyphenols, which are really good for your brain and your body. So again, with coffee, moderation. If it doesn't work for you, don't drink it. If it sets off your anxiety, avoid it. Drink it early in the day. Some studies showed that consuming less than 400 milligrams in a day is helpful for most people. But again, I think we are so personalized now in the planning that we're doing for nutrition, that it could vary, but drink in moderation early in the day so it doesn't impact your sleep. And again, like my patient I spoke to you about at the beginning, let's not be adding a ton of stuff to it that only adds to the sugar load on your body. So kind of clean up your coffee like you clean up your cocktails.
Yeah, absolutely. Out of all the different dietary patterns that are out there, everything from vegan to carnivore and everything in between, as far as paleo, keto, zone diet, South Beach diets, every conceivable permutation that's been around, Mediterranean. Which of these diets would you personally consider to be the healthiest in terms of long-term brain health, gut-brain connection, mental health, this whole picture? Which one of
Mhm.
these dietary patterns if you could choose only one, would you say overall, understanding there's individual variability, but in as a generalization, this one I think is the best overall dietary pattern?
So I would probably say if I had to pick one, the Mind diet, which has a lot of which is research backed by the late Martha Claire Morris and her group, because it combines the benefits of the Mediterranean eating pattern as well. So, and it doesn't exclude the types of foods that people may be eating. They may be consuming poultry, seafood, red meat. Now, usually they talk about lean meats here, but what I would say is that with the recent research in the last few years around saturated fats, I don't think we need to be as um, we don't need to be demonizing red meat in the way that it might have been. But I think if you do consume it, consider the source and include in your diet. I hate to actually pin it down to one because there's so many caveats. Like I don't necessarily, let's take the ketogenic diet, for example. It started off with a long history of use for epilepsy, but it has been used in conditions in mental health and has been beneficial. But context matters because you cannot tell someone with a severe mental illness to follow a strict diet without having, say, family, a support system, a case manager, or other things that can support them eating that diet,
Mhm.
especially if you want them to improve from it. So context really matters because when I've treated severely mentally ill patients, it's difficult enough to get them to take a medication, let alone change a diet.
Mhm.
So, while all of these diets have a lot of either some clinical cases or evidence or data behind them, context matters, and um, with every single one of them, there might be a nuance which is significant. For example, I mentioned fiber-rich foods are hugely important, and they are. But someone with IBS, IBC, SIBO, Crohn's disease could have a great difficulty with fiber and might have to work with a functional gastroenterologist to figure out what they need to eat.
Got it. My last question to you is, are there any final thoughts you want to leave people with, and then tell people where they can learn more from you and follow your work?
Thanks, Ari. Great question. So I believe that you have the power at the end of your fork. And if you truly embrace that and you think more deeply about it, you realize that you can truly impact your emotional health, your physical health, your metabolic health by how you eat. So that power is very important, and you can control it. You can find me, you can actually get a free chapter of my book at the Gut Brain Romance, gutbrainromance.com. Follow me on social media at DRUMANAIDOO. Check out my website and subscribe to my newsletter at umanaidoomd.com. And we always love to hear from people. So thanks for a great conversation, Ari.
Thank you so much, Dr. Naidoo. It was an absolute pleasure. And to everyone listening, please go to Amazon, pick up a copy of her book, This Is Your Brain on Food. I personally enjoyed it tremendously, and I learned a lot from it. It's packed with a lot of very valuable ideas and even lots of stuff that we didn't have time to get into here. So, Dr. Naidoo, thank you so much. I look forward to hopefully speaking with you again.
Thanks so much, Ari. It was a pleasure.
Hey there, this is Ari again. Thank you so much for listening to this episode. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, if you found it valuable, please share it with your friends, share it with your family, help me get the word out there. Also, if you're on YouTube, make sure to hit the subscribe button and hit that little bell to get notifications every time we release a new video or new episode of the podcast. And if you're listening to this, make sure to subscribe to this podcast on iTunes or on your favorite podcast app. Thanks so much for supporting my work at the Energy Blueprint. I hope you enjoyed this episode. I will see you in the next